Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Kamla Ganesh, formerly from the Department of Sociology, University of Mumbai, currently a Senior Fellow of Indian Council of Social Science Research. We are talking about the course Sociology of the Indian Diaspora, and right now we will be discussing religion and religious organizations in the diaspora. The Indian diaspora is among the fastest growing diasporas in the world. It is also an extremely diverse diaspora, so much that scholars question whether we should use the singular or whether we should say Indian diasporas. Many of these diversities stem from the diversities within India itself. For example, caste, class, region, religion, ethnicity, language, all these come into play when a group migrates and becomes a diaspora. Then there is the difference in the historical period of migration. Some groups have migrated in the 19th and early 20th centuries as part of the colonial diaspora. Others have migrated soon after independence to the West for higher studies and for professional jobs. Yet others have migrated in waves to the Gulf during the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. Yet others have migrated to the Gulf countries from the 60s onwards, and that migration still continues. The most recent phase of migration is that of IT professionals to the West and to the other advanced countries. Yet despite all these diversities, one of the common factors among all the Indian diasporas is their involvement and engagement in religion and religious activities. In fact, this is something that is common to practically all diasporas, and it has to do with the very condition of being a diaspora, which is that of leaving one's homeland and settling or living in another country, struggling to make a life there, struggling to succeed. This existential condition itself spawns an engagement, a deeper engagement with religion than was the case often in the homeland itself. So, in this module, we are going to talk about religion, religiosity, religious expression and religious adaptation. The objectives of this module are to get an insight into general patterns of change and adaptation in religious normative structure and activity in the diaspora, and to understand how Indian diasporic communities practice religion in their host countries, in the personal domain and through organizations. Research has consistently shown that immigrants become more religious after migrating. This is true even when they migrate to the West, where religion does not have a high public profile, and it is especially true of new immigrants. However, the manner in which it manifests itself in the diaspora has some points of difference from the homeland. The diaspora does not simply imitate the homeland culture and religious practices, but reconsiders old ideas. This involves careful deliberation rather than simple replication. Religion and religiosity are not mere attachment to the homeland traditions, but also a way of asserting one's difference from the hostland and a claim for recognition and rights there. Religion as a category exists in close proximity to the other two categories of ethnicity and nationalism as a basis for identity. In different contexts, a group's social solidarity can shift from a religious to an ethnic basis. For example, in the USA, Jain immigrants lack the critical mass needed to sustain strictly Jain temples and religious associations. Hence, they join Hindu temples with mixed religion membership. This could be seen not so much as replacing religion per se, but as a syncretic and ecumenical blending of different but compatible religions against the background of shared ethnicity and nationalism. Temple building in this sense includes organized communities and traditional practices which nurture a comprehensive Indian identity as opposed to a specific Jain identity in the USA. Through these practices of temple building, Jains develop ties to the homeland, creating a sense of ethnicity and a formation of group identity. Globalization of the last few decades has given diasporic religion a distinct personality. It has created a greater interdependence between nation states across all borders in trade, commerce, religion and spiritualism. Indian diasporic communities have reconstructed their religious and cultural identities in the course of participation in various spiritual and religious movements of the homeland. These include, for the most part, relatively benign engagements aimed at individual and community well-being, but have also included violent political movements for secession on the basis of religion, like the Khalistani movement, and consolidation for a political interpretation of Hindutva, like the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. These movements have been fueled by rise in international migration accompanied by the revolution in ICT. In particular, New Age religious spiritual movements have enabled the Indian diasporic communities to connect with their homeland while offering space for transnational spiritualism. One can witness that with the ascendance of mass media and global electronic communications, the diffusion of religious practices and beliefs has been a result of an easy communication network through blogs, social networking sites, websites, films, and so on. Now, religious and spiritual movements among the diaspora have a strong organizational link to sacred places or individuals in India. For instance, in the Art of Living centers in Germany or Satya Sai Baba centers in other places in the diaspora, one can find special stalls where books, CDs, DVDs on their respective spiritual leaders are exhibited for sale, apart from an assortment of ethnic foods, books on ethnic foods. For instance, in the Art of Living centers in Germany or the Satya Sai Baba centers in other places in the diaspora, one can find special stalls where books, CDs and DVDs on their respective spiritual leaders are exhibited for sale, apart from an assortment of ethnic foods, just as it is done in ashrams in Bangalore or Prashanti Nilayam on special occasions. The majority of the emigrants from India are Hindus. Emigrants to the Gulf countries are predominantly Muslims, and they are also to be found in a fair number in North America and UK. UK and Canada have also a lot of Sikh and Punjabi Hindu communities. Certain occupations like nursing are dominated by Christian women from Kerala. Parsis and Jains are small communities in India but are spread across the globe in disproportionately large numbers. None of these religions are homogeneous. They have further subdivisions based not only on doctrinal differences but also regional, linguistic and ethnic differences which affect religious practice. This module takes up the case of diasporic Hinduism in some detail, since it constitutes the overwhelming majority in the Indian diaspora. Other religions will also be referred to as illustrations. Hinduism has several internal religious divisions. However, over the last few centuries, a certain overarching common belief system has emerged that can be called Hindu despite internal variations. Still, there are three categories that need to be differentiated within diasporic Hinduism. Firstly, Orthodox Canonical Hinduism or Sanatani Hinduism, which of course has distinct regional manifestations, the northern and the southern variety. Secondly, there are a number of reformist sects that arose during the British period that sought to modify, eliminate superstitions, go back to the Vedas and so on, such as the Brahmo Samaj, Arya Samaj, Ramakrishna Mission, which have not only influenced Hindus in India but also in the diaspora. The third category consists of what can be called New Age or Charismatic sects, which draw broadly from Hinduism but are open to people from other religions as well, without having to change their official religion. Religious adaptation is inevitable in the diasporic setting, given the need to negotiate and reconcile with hostland policies and ethos. Diasporics also bring a sense of reflection to their religious practice and emphasize on authenticity. A simple example of adaptation is the location and timings of gurdwaras and temples. Gurdwaras in India are open all days in the week. However, often in the diaspora, The Gurdwara is open only on Sunday because of financial reasons or distance from homes of devotees or lack of time to visit. For example, in Finland, the Gurdwara serves langar or traditional food only on Sunday. Sikhs cannot erect the Nishan Sahib, which is an important symbol of worship, on the outside of the allotted building of the Gurdwara because of local government rules. There are countless formalities. As a result, the Finnish Sikhs decided to host the Nishan Sahib inside the Gurdwara. This is an adaptation to exigencies. In Rome, on the other hand, Sikhs have established several sites of worship wherever they settle because of lack of good public transport systems. These sites are still rented as the property rates in Rome are very high. One could read the presence of several sites of worship as a sign of well-established settlements. However, here it is the external requirements of not having good public transport systems that compelled the Sikh community to adapt. Generation and gender are factors that affect religious behavior. Even though everyday religious practice at home, school and formal places of worship all shape the identities of diasporic children, differences surface between the first and subsequent generations. Conditioning factors such as being exposed to the education system in the host country, a secular society, and civil discursive practices influence children. Often, roles of women in families and in the wider community experience sizable change in the diaspora. This is illustrated by Qureshi's study of how Sikh women negotiate with the management of a Gurdwara in Britain, which is rooted in male dominance. The emergence of women-only Sikh associations is a sign of their taking up leadership roles. Diasporic women also contribute in reproducing religious practices in the private realm at home. This shows how gender and generational strands within religious communities construct their legitimacy within existing traditions. Religion is also deployed as a political response to HOSTLAND. Visible markers of religious identity may remain unstressed or may be stressed upon at different times depending on the politics of identity in the HOSTLAND environment. If immigrants to a particular country are few in number and have to struggle to establish themselves, they downplay the external markers of religious identity. But where they perceive the need to assert themselves, they highlight their religious identity through sartorial modes. For example, Ferraris and Sai have studied in Italy how Sikhs, in order to integrate with the host society, have shaved beards, cut long hair, removed their turbans, and adopted a representation of Indian rather than solely of a Sikh identity. However, recently after the attacks on them, mistakenly being taken for Muslims, the Sikhs have been propelled to display a proper Sikh identity. They use the xenophobic attitudes of Italy towards Muslims to promote a differential self-representation of Sikhism as a religion of tolerance. Sikhs have thus been able to put themselves forward as the non-threatening other. Thus we see how the burden of being good citizens who do not cause trouble to the local authorities falls upon the diasporic population. Discussing the politics of recognition, Vertovec talks about campaigns engaged by immigrant associations for legal tolerance, cultural rights, freedom from discrimination, and access to public resources. These needs arise due to minority status. Ferraris and Sai explore how Gurdwaras as physical and institutional spaces have been established in diverse locations and how public performances of religious belonging can show different degrees of integration within local context. Building of mosques, gurdwaras, temples, and celebrations of festivals through public display, performance, and processions, all of which occupies a substantial part of diasporic activity, is no doubt an expression of religiosity answering existential needs of the diaspora. Yet, at some levels, it is simultaneously an attempt to engage in the politics of recognition within the host society and claim public space as legitimate residents or citizens. This often involves prolonged negotiation with the municipal authorities and struggle with the local citizens to gain acceptance. One of the changes in the diasporic context is the shift of religious activity from the home to a community space. There are 4 stages in the establishment of diasporic public spaces of worship in England according to a study by Peach and Gale. The first is private alteration of houses into prayer rooms. The second stage is the use of abandoned churches or warehouses on the outskirts of the town, far away from residential localities, for worship. The third and the fourth stages incorporate the onset of domes, minarets and Hindu towers. This is a long drawn out process because they need the approval by authorities. Through building places of worship, the Indian communities express a confident assertion of their negotiated terms of belonging with British society. A temple has both a private and public dimension. The public aspect is established through religious processions and festivals. Let us spend some time in exploring Hindu temple building in the diaspora. Apart from religious and spiritual needs, it serves social and cultural functions as well. The first wave of consolidated temple building in the West by diasporic Hindus began in the 1970s. Inevitably, there has been adaptation to the host society and polity. Festivals that are normally celebrated in homes are celebrated in temples. Many weddings and community celebrations are also held in the temples. These often become occasions for display and consumption of homeland culture, literature, music, dance, theatre, yoga, cuisine and so on. I have seen how Hindu temples in Europe offer Tamil migrants a space to enhance their political and cultural identity. Temples hold classes in Tamil language, Carnatic music and Bharatanatyam, and at times even sponsor sports activities. Religion and culture get intermingled and are deployed to socialize the second generation into community values and norms and help them cope with problems of double and hybrid identities. There is another powerful motive for temple building in diasporas which have been violently displaced from the homeland. I have worked on Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka who live in Europe. They are engaged in massive temple building, and at least in Europe, the temples are more numerous and popular than those built by the Indian diaspora. One of their important functions is to cater to the existential crisis triggered by the civil war in Sri Lanka. Tamil immigrants had experienced violent displacement from their homeland, facing loss of property and death of relatives. All this, combined with efforts to survive in a new environment, has led to trauma and anxiety, which temple-centered devotional activities help to cope with through self-healing, espousing outlooks which enable them to look at deeper meaning in their sorrows. Thus, healing and psychic reintegration are potent needs that temples take care of. Simultaneously, the temples also provide a forum for political mobilization of the community for supporting the Tamil cause in Sri Lanka. Similarly, the role of Gurdwaras in mobilizing Sikhs politically during the heyday of the Khalistan movement has been noted. Yet another contribution of temples and other places of worship is in education and development activities, while raising funds for the diasporic community and homeland as well. They also perform various functions like providing relief work, spreading awareness about AIDS, and collecting funds for natural disasters. Over the last many years, several new age sects built around a central figure or guru and charismatic religious movements have emerged. The term New Age is a wide and all-encompassing one to describe those organizations and movements that deviate from canonical or doctrinaire religion in serious ways, at the same time catering to the individual's spiritual and religious needs. The New Age movements of the 70s and the 80s incorporated aspects of an assortment of Eastern and other traditions, with emphasis on makeover and transformation of the self via various activities such as healing, body work, astrology, yoga, meditation and so forth. India inspired New Age religious movements like ISKCON, Art of Living, Chinmaya Mission, Transcendental Meditation, Sufi Ruhaniyat International, Brahma Kumaris, Satya Sai Organization, etc. have gained immense popularity across the globe, approximately since the 60s when the gurus became celebrities and attracted a lot of other celebrities and prominent figures towards them. Charismatic leaders such as Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, Shri Satya Sai Baba, Rajneesh and Sachidananda Swami, who have contributed to the establishment of religious organizations across the globes. Most of these groups, although inspired by Hinduism, with inputs from an eclectic range of sources and practices, attract numerous followers from non-Hindu and non-Indian population across the globe. Although many of these new groups have been developed within and inspired by Hinduism, they are not part of its canonical structure. They often draw followers from diverse political, ethnic and gender identities. Most of them claim to revive ancient Indian spiritual wisdom, which is packaged or rather repackaged according to the contemporary needs of these movements. They are a 20th century phenomenon referring back to the Upanishads and Vedas, while calling for personal observances on diet, lifestyle, yoga and so on. They do not function formally on caste basis and attract worshippers from an assortment of various castes and religions. Most of these movements and organizations undertake a wide variety of cultural, educational, spiritual and humanitarian activities throughout the world. The diasporic population's participation in spiritual movements of the homeland has aided in the construction and reconstruction of religious and cultural identities in the diaspora. New Age religious movements, just like the reformist religious movements like the Ramakrishna Math and orthodox Sanatani traditions like the Sringeri Shankara Math, have also transformed their identities from diasporic to transnational. Many immigrants visit their homelands to participate in the spiritual movements and circulate the ideas of their gurus to a wider audience across the globe. This aids the process of becoming transnational. Several social scientists have endeavored to define, theorize about the notions of religiosity versus spirituality. However, there has been little consensus on what the terms actually mean. Previously, the terms were not differentiated from each other until a secular discourse became prominent, which was skeptical of organized religion. Religiosity is then broadly defined as acceptance of a set of beliefs as true and observing a set of rituals to justify them. For example, a person of a Christian faith believes that Jesus is God's Son and observes baptism and practices Holy Communion. A Muslim believes Allah to be the supreme power and observes Salat. In contrast, spirituality is more ambiguous and inclusive. It has different meanings for different people. For some, it could fall within the purview of partaking in religious practices. For others, it is more personal and less institutional. They understand spirituality as getting in touch with themselves via meditation, quiet prayers, long walks, reflections, psychic communication, etc. For others, it's more personal and less institutionalized. They understand spirituality as getting in touch with themselves via meditation, prayers, walks, yoga, reflections and psychic communication. Lastly, with regard to the most prominent religion, Indian religion in the diaspora, that is Hinduism, the diasporic Hindus find themselves in a dilemma when trying to define it. On the one hand, Hinduism is characterized by a variety of gods and goddesses, of cults, of festivals, of beliefs. It is a very diverse religion. It doesn't have internal homogeneity. When diasporics meet or are juxtaposed with other religions, both Indian religions such as Sikhism and Islam, as well as other Semitic religions like Christianity and Judaism, they are perplexed and confronted with the lack of coherence or lack of seeming coherence of their own religion, and they take recourse to ways and means of organizing it in a more centralized manner so that they can more effectively transmit it to their children. Here they take recourse to older Indian traditions of monism, monotheism, and the belief that underneath all the diversity there is oneness. In sum, Indian diasporas lead an active religious life in all parts of the globe. There is inevitably adaptation to the situation, to the politics, to the culture of the destination country. At the same time, diasporas develop a certain reflection on the nature of their religion and try to separate what is essential or what is authentic from what is acquired and what is peripheral, and this activity constantly goes on in the diaspora. In the case of Hinduism in the diaspora, there is some effort to Semitize it and to organize it in the manner, in the centralized manner of Islam and Christianity. There is a move from private to congregational worship, and there is also a move to construct houses of prayer as in a way of asserting themselves in the hostland. Finally, the places of worship and religion perform many more functions than they do in the homeland, combining spiritual, psychic, existential functions with cultural, social and political functions as well.